Hello, welcome to class number 4 of the French Revolution. And now we are going to talk about the course of the French Revolution. The course of the French Revolution is divided into 3 stages. The first, from 1789 to 1792, obviously influenced by the philosophy of liberal theory. The second, between 1792 and 1794, influenced by the philosophy of the democratic theory of Rousseau. And in the third stage, we go back to aristocracy, that is to say, from 1795 to 1799, when Napoleon produced the coup d'etat. Well, let's talk about the first stage. It was influenced by the liberal theory, remember, Locke, but mainly Voltaire and Montesquieu's ideas. The theory was the liberal theory, and during this period, France, remember, was in the hands of the National Assembly, the ones who gathered in the tennis court and produced the tennis court oath and proclaimed themselves the National Assembly. Well, France was in hands of the National Assembly with the leaders of the third state, who finally got the political power they wanted. It started on, just for you to know, on July the 14th of 1789 with the destruction of the Bastille. So, what was the Bastille? The Bastille was a prison, and we can talk about 2 different opinions here. They said that some historians said that they destroyed the Bastille because they thought the members of the third state thought that there were political prisoners there. In fact, it is said that there were just 7 prisoners in the Bastille. But there is another current of thought which states that the destruction of the Bastille represented the destruction of the absolute monarchy. And I think that this is more possible because the Bastille was a symbol of absolutism, because people did not have rights and they were sent to prison without a trial. So the destruction of the Bastille on July the 14th was the beginning of the French Revolution. Although the destruction of the Bastille occurred and the assassination of some nobles also took place, the first stage was not the bloody period as the second one. Which were the most important achievement of the first stage? The destruction of feudal privileges. Obviously, as the third state was ruling France, aristocracy was deprived of those feudal privileges that they enjoyed during the absolute monarchy of Louis XVI. The feudal dues of the peasants were completely abolished. The clergy and nobility were compelled to pay taxes, and monopolies of all kinds were forbidden. And even more important was the Declaration of the Rights of Man. It was a document which embodied, of course, the teachings of the liberal political theory, which highlighted individual rights. Well, after the first stage, obviously, came the second stage, which started in 1799. It differed from the first stage greatly in many ways. Remember, here we've got the system here was a limited monarchy. So the king existed, was just as a decoration, but he had some rights. In the second stage, the king was suspended and France became a republic. First, the king was suspended, but then he was assassinated. No, he was obviously condemned to death. The limited monarchy, as I told you, was transformed into a republic. The king was beheaded, was executed, and the liberal theory of the first stage was replaced by the democratic theory of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. The power was in the masses, and this is why the second stage was the bloodiest period of the French Revolution. We have the execution of the king, the September massacre, and the reign of terror, which killed more than 30,000 people. The National Assembly was replaced by the National Convention. So these main differences are to be taken into account. What was the function of the National Convention? The same function that the National Assembly had, that is to say, to build or to draft, a new constitution. It was the government of the second stage, so it was a republic. The governing power was not the National Assembly, but the National Convention. They were supposed to draft a constitution and to surrender its power to a regular government, but it never happened. In 1793, the convention delegated its power here, the National Convention, to the Committee of Public Safety. The Committee of Public Safety was a group of 9 people. Later on, it was composed of 12 people. The Committee of Public Safety became the highest body of government in France. So from the National Convention, we go to the Committee of Public Safety. At that time in France, there were 2 political powers or 2 political parties, that is to say, the Girondists and the Jacobins. They shared the politics of the country. They had different opinions and different political views. The Jacobins were the followers of Rousseau. That is to say, they were convinced of this movement, and while the Girondists were more moderate. They were not that aggressive. They were intellectual people, while the Jacobins were followers of Rousseau. The 2 main leaders of the Jacobins were Danton and Robespierre. Danton and Maximilien Robespierre. They were the leaders of this political party, and obviously they were the leaders of the Committee of Public Safety. They shared the power. But all of a sudden, a feeling of distrust from Robespierre to Danton emerged, and that complicated the political situation of France. They started the reign of terror. So this is kind of contradictory, because if you remember, in the first stage, the Bastille was destroyed because it represented absolutism. But the Jacobins, with Danton and Robespierre, started the reign of terror. 30,000 people who were suspected of being against the government were executed with the guillotine. So it was a coming back to the times of when people did not have rights. What was the problem, as I told you, between Danton and Robespierre? Danton had emerged in the group of Girondists, and then he went to form part of the Jacobins, and that is why Robespierre was jealous. But the true fact is that Danton was much more popular than Robespierre, and that was the problem. So Robespierre plotted against Danton and accused him of treason to the country, and he was executed. Obviously, as Danton was very popular, his followers did not stop until executing Robespierre together with his 21 lieutenants. So the situation of the country was concentrated on this fight between Robespierre and Danton, and they forgot about the welfare of the people in France. Although it was the second stage, a bloody period, there were achievements also in this stage. The abolition of slavery in the colonies was one very important achievement. The abolition of imprisonment for debt was also very important, and the repeal of the right of primogeniture, which is connected with literature and the society and with the Catholic Church. It was forbidden, it was abolished, and the first educational plans were also launched. So they were the most important aspects of the second stage. Remember, liberal theory in the first, democratic theory in the second, National Assembly in the first, National Convention and the Committee of Public Safety in the second stage, limited monarchy and republic here, the most important aspects. Then the second stage is concentrated on this dispute that we have already talked about. The third stage between 1795 and 1799 was a coming back to aristocracy, was a coming back to the liberal theory. Because after obviously the second stage, the third stage was not as bloody as the second. It was very similar as the first. It was characterized by stagnation and corruption. Enfranchisement was extended to all citizens who could read and write, so we can conclude if enfranchisement was extended to all people who could read and write, low-class citizens were allowed to vote? No, because the first and the third stage, remember, favored aristocracy, the higher classes. So it was an indirect election. It was not a direct election. People voted for electors, and to be an elector, citizens had to be, we say, a well-to-do citizens. That is to say, belonging to the higher classes. So it was very, very tricky, this system of voting. Concerning the system of government, remember, we have the National Convention, the National Assembly, the National Convention, and in the third stage, it was composed, the legislative body was composed of the Council of the 500 and the Council of Ancient. And they drafted a constitution, and it was the constitution of the year 3. And this movement, in this third stage, we have the appearance of a man called Babeuf. From my opinion, it was the only attempt of making the French Revolution a movement of the poor. He belonged to the lower classes, and he wanted to start a revolution in this third stage of the French Revolution. Obviously, he didn't have the political necessary power, so he was easily controlled and he was executed. That was the last attempt to make the French Revolution, as I told you, a movement of the poor. This is all the cause of the French Revolution. The consequences of the French Revolution are not very difficult to imagine, because they are connected with the different political and philosophical theories that dominated in these three stages. Passion for liberty was one. Absolute monarchy disappeared. It came back in France, but at this time it disappeared. Slavery was abolished in France and in the colonies, and it exerted a great influence in other countries, for example, in Latin America. Well, this is all about the French Revolution.
Mi mamá es francesa, nada más celebramos el Día de la Bastille.
Podemos divertirnos aquí. ¿Hacemos una fiesta en la playa? Sí, buena idea, Lisa.
Yo sé de una muy buena. Yo sé dónde comprar baguettes.